Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things for you are? I hope it's fantastic. Everything here is great. Book review. We haven't done a book review in a while. We've done some book talks, but those aren't really the same as book reviews. This, one video talking about a book. And today we are talking about Lost Man's Lane from Scott Carson. I discovered Scott Carson, I don't know why. Somebody suggested a book of his called Where They Wait, and I ended up reading it and liked it. And then that was his second book. His first book was, whatever. It doesn't matter. He's written 3 books. This is his third book. Technically, in case you don't know, this is like his 30th, 20-somethingth book, because Scott Carson is a pseudonym for the author Michael Corita, I think is how you say his last name. The Chill. So he wrote The Chill, Where They Wait, and then this is his newest book, which I think just came out like last month, or maybe the month before last. So I was immediately interested in reading it because his other 2 books I enjoyed. And I really liked this book. I gave this book 5 stars on Goodreads. It's an enjoyable read. But here's the thing. So Scott Carson exists because Michael Corita is best known as a mystery thriller writer. And he wanted to write more supernatural elements into his books. And people in the mystery thriller genre are expected to stay in their lane. Like, just stay in your lane. So he developed a pseudonym so that he could write some of those more supernatural anchored stories. And the first 2 books, Where They Wait and The Chill, both were, I would say in some ways, more supernatural than this book. But in this book, it's not just a plot device. And it felt like, in a lot of ways, especially in Where They Wait, the supernatural element of that book was just a plot device. It was just whatever. In this book, the supernatural element is just kind of it is what it is. All 3 books are based on like a place in time and like something coming from a place, not necessarily from out of space, out of time, not some ancient magic. Maybe it is ancient magic, doesn't really matter. There's something special about this place that's causing things to happen. Here's the thing. This book, it's not a thriller. It's a mystery. There's mystery here that the main character, Marshall, is trying to solve. The main character is Marshall Miller. He's a 17-year-old boy who experiences some wild stuff. And he spends his senior year trying to figure it out. So it's a little bit of a coming of age. Actually, it's a lot of coming of age. I would say that for the average mystery, supernatural thriller reader, this book might be a little boring. It's more of a slice of life about Marshall and the people in his life in this interesting, in his interesting town. The supernatural mystery part of it is kind of secondary. And I think that's part of the reason I liked it. It's set in the late 90s. I think it's actually, it's literally set in 1999 and in the beginning of 2000. There's a little bit of that I was 19 in 2000. So this is my, I recognize this story. I recognize the characters. I recognize the events. I recognize the high school parties and fields. I recognize small town America. I identify with this. And that's probably means I'm biased when I'm saying this is a 5 out of 5. I would say that, stacked up against other supernatural thrillers, supernatural mysteries, whatever, I might not say this is a 5 out of 5. But for me, this really was fantastic. Marshall has an experience early in the book where he sees, where he's pulled over by he gets his driver's license. He's immediately pulled over by a police officer who acts a little bit weird, who kind of yells at him, and as he's trying to like gather himself to pull away, he looks in his rearview mirror and he sees that the police officer has a girl in the backseat of his car. She is crying and she's wearing a uniform for an ice cream store, and it's currently the winter and the ice cream store's not open. And he's thinking, that's weird. She drives off. Time passes, girl is missing. Surprise. So Marshall becomes like the last person to see her alive. But what he sees and what he experienced in that traffic stop proves to be, like nobody can prove it. He was given a ticket by a police officer that doesn't exist. It has no fingerprints on it. There is no person in the police force by that name. Like there's a whole bunch of story to that. He ends up meeting a private investigator who's researching this thing. The private investigator hires him to be a kind of an apprentice, and they start trying to solve the mystery, and things happen. So without getting into spoilers, it is a fantastic slice of life for this teenage boy growing up in Bloomsbury, Indiana, or Bloomsbury, something like that, Indiana, rural Indiana. It is a slice of life for that. It is a slice of life about a boy being raised by a single mother, by teenage relationships, and literally like romantic relationships as well as like lifelong friendships, that sort of stuff. It's a whole coming of age thing, and it was really, really good. I will say, the only thing I would consider a trigger warning in this book would be snakes. There's a lot of snakes. Snakes are central to the plot. So if snakes give you the heebie-jeebies, don't read the book. There's a lot going on with snakes. And so from that point, we'll switch into spoilers and I'll talk about the snakes. Because the snakes. So it comes down to Marshall sees this cop. Marshall sees a snake in his house, a rattlesnake that isn't colored correctly. It's like a black and white rattlesnake, which isn't really a thing. And he meets this investigator, and during a sort of hypnotic session with that investigator where Marshall tries to draw this character from his memory, Marshall realizes that the character from his memory was wearing like a older police uniform. It wasn't a current day police uniform. He had a revolver in his holster, not a semi-automatic. Like he recalls details that were not quite right. Like, whoa, this isn't quite right. And so obviously this is a supernatural book, so there is supernatural elements, and it kind of revolves around this snake. And this snake ends up being like a recurring theme. It appears in Marshall's mom's vehicle. His neighbor starts collecting snakes. Like, it's a whole thing. And that part of it was great. I enjoy the sort of folklore supernatural where like this town actually has a story, and Scott gives it to us. By the end of the book, we learn the story of the snakes. We learn the story of the quarry and the ancient, whatever magic that's in that quarry. We learn the story through the last 100 years of this kind of recycling of this abduction scenario. We get to learn, the kind of the folklore of this town. And it's all, the speculation by the townspeople turns into just spooky stories that are told at Halloween. But it turns out, as always, there's quite a bit of truth going on behind the scenes. I will say my one level of disappointment is the beginning of the story. Marshall's pulled over by this cop. This cop gives him a ticket, and Marshall notices that the cop's thumb burns the paper. And there's this weird scorch mark where the cop was holding the paper. That's not and he can't explain it. It's not a thumbprint, but it kind of is. The cops ask him about, the initial investigators ask him about it. That's never explained or resolved. Like, it means nothing in the grand. The ticket means nothing in the grand scheme of things. None of that matters. Which I wish there was a little bit of a payoff there. I wish we could have got this scene. So what's going on in this story is that Marshall's actually able to see like in two different time zones, two different eras. So he is seeing the original abductor guy. There's this guy who has his soul trapped in a snake that when there's unseasonably warm days, he comes out and he abducts. He was in love and whatever, and so he ends up abducting a female every however often that weather pattern happens. Marshall is seeing that person from the, not necessarily a ghost, but that person from the past. Marshall sees some buildings in the town as if they were in the past. And so he's seeing kind of two eras at the same time, and that kind of explains why this cop looked old. But the paper thing is never explained. And it was kind of a big deal. In the beginning, it was this whole device. It was this whole like, oh, what is going on with this ticket? We just forget about it. It doesn't matter. Completely useless. I wish that had a little bit of a payoff. But in the end, we got a pretty good payoff, I think. The ending is very anticlimactic. The story of the snake and the abduction and whatever is kind of told to us instead of shown to us. There's that whole showing, not telling. We find out that the investigator is kind of immortal, and so he ends up telling Marshall this story through a letter of what's actually going on in this town. Marshall figures some of it out through newspapers and that sort of thing, but the actualness of it is just told through this letter, and then they go to resolve the situation. They go to trap, like basically re-entomb this evil, which is a kind of an anticlimactic point. The climax of Marshall having to climb a cliff and having gone through like rock climbing, all that stuff, so he could, a little Batman thing there. Like he's like, I think I'm gonna have to climb that someday, so I better go learn how to climb. So he goes to the local rock gym and learns how to climb. That was neat, and it was like a good empowering moment for him to be able to do this climb, growth moment, whatever. But the resolution was just kind of It was okay, but it was kind of lame also. But I didn't really care at that point. By that point, I was fine with it. Like I was invested in Marshall as a character. I was invested in Noah Storm, the investigator, as a character. I was invested in Marshall's mom. I was invested in Carrie, Marshall's girlfriend. I was invested in these characters, Jerry, all of it. And the story was just, who gives a crap? Like, let's just... And so when it kind of just wrapped up real quick, great, let's move on with our lives. And then we get this little... Like, the story is told... There's even, like, a author's note, but the author, not Scott Carson, the author being Marshall, because Marshall is writing this book. This is Marshall's book. So there's this author's note about this is my story, whatever. And at the end, we get one of those... such and such went on to do this, such and such went on to... And so it felt really cool. It felt kind of like an 80s movie written as a book. It was a good book. I really enjoyed it. If you are it's a little nostalgia, a little bit, but late 90s stuff, Y2K stuff. Scott uses a few moments to kind of reflect on today versus then, and how nobody at that time would have believed the society that we live in today, or how some of the characters in here literally speculate about the future and whether they're right or wrong. We know, obviously, and the author knows, and the author kind of alludes to that. The author being Marshall. I know that's confusing, but whatever. Good book. Glad I read it. Very excited for any more Scott Carson stuff, and I will probably at some point read some of Michael Corrida's works. If you know of any of his books and you think there's any that I should read, let me know in the comments. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I'll see you again on Monday. Today's word you should know to sound smart is vociferous. It's an adjective meaning something said loudly so as to gain the listener's attention. A person who speaks loudly so as to gain attention. Let the singers with vocal voices most vociferous in sweet vociferation out-vociferize even sound itself. Henry Carey, an English poet. Vociferous. VOCIFEROUS. Some people accuse me of being a vociferous because I have this big voice, but I'm just talking. And I get excited. It's not really like I have to have attention. I get energetic about what I'm talking about.